When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. When the rain don't fall, that's when you know you're gonna go dry. And it won't do no good to be crying out loud, babe, or cursing the sky.
Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm joined today by Debra Cohen, who has twice gone to the border in Arizona.
Actually, 3 times.
Oh, 3 times. Oh, okay.
And I'll tell you the difference.
Yeah,
about those trips.
and she's going to share her experiences from those various trips. So welcome, Debra.
Thank you.
You were on the show once, like 8 years ago, maybe,
years ago, right.
after you had been at Standing Rock.
Right.
And so if we have time, maybe you can even, we can compare some of those situations too.
Okay.
But I don't know,
Okay. We'll give
55
it a shot.
minutes may or may not be enough. So thanks for coming on. And I guess I'll ask you quickly, you've been there 3 times. What's been your motivation for going there?
My motivation has been caring and humanity and a sense of decency, which is sorely lacking, I think, on a national basis, pretty much.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, I don't know, we've lost some creativity or something. If we don't see it, it's not really real.
Right, right. I will also add just one more thought that occurred to me, what motivates me to go. I think part of my motivation is coming from a Jewish family and understanding through our history going back centuries what it's like for people to be told they're not wanted, that they're not good enough, that there's no place for them. I think somewhere deep down inside that has a lot to do with it.
We have a lot of generational trauma that we carry around.
Right.
And for me, part of it has also been that, like, there have not always been other people to speak up
Right.
for anyone who is low status and marginalized. And it sounds like one of the things you're going and then you're talking about it.
Well, I had 2 reasons for going on each trip. Number 1 was to go and be of help as I could, but also to bring the stories back. I think that so many people are holding opinions about immigration and what should happen and what shouldn't happen based on a lack of information, a lack of facts. They're based solely on opinion, and opinion without the facts doesn't get us very far.
It certainly doesn't find solutions.
Right, I agree.
So, I don't know, you have a slide presentation. You might want to talk a little bit about your various trips and how things changed over time.
Yeah, I'd like to take just a minute to do that. My first trip was in 2019, and I went with a group of women, all from here in Connecticut. We went together, and at that time, most of the people who were crossing, and I'm going to use air quotes a million times today, illegally, because there was no room for them at legal ports of entry. Most of those people were crossing into the United States desert and trying to make their way to their various destinations. So in 2019, most of the work that the Samaritans were doing was actually following known migrant trails to leave water, to leave food, to leave blankets and whatnot.
Well, what time of year was that first trip?
That was in, I believe, April of 2019. What's changed is that so many more people now who are coming are seeking asylum and finding ways to enter the United States side of the wall, through whatever holes or gaps in the wall they can, and actually sitting down on the dirt road, waiting for Border Patrol to come pick them up so that they can legally file their claim. So it's not so much going out into the desert now on the part of the Samaritans, although there are lots of groups who are continuing that vital work. But it's actually meeting people at the wall to say, first of all, welcome. There are many of us who want you here and who value you, but also to be on hand with water and snacks and socks and whatever kind of immediate aid we can give. And then it's also the Samaritans who are calling Border Patrol to say, yeah, there's a group of, 75
Seeking asylum.
And please come pick them up. So that's what's different now. Many more of the people who are coming to claim asylum and to do it the right way.
Now, where are they coming from?
Oh my gosh.
And the assumption is they're all coming from South and Central America, and I know that's not the case.
Right. I've met so many people from those two areas that you mentioned. I also met people from Sudan and India. The last time that I was down there, I was staying at a dorm-like situation. And I had a housemate, if you will, who was from Africa. So people are truly coming here from all over the world.
And it's probably a long and scary trip.
It's absolutely long and scary and truly life-threatening. There's a man named Alvaro Enciso in Tucson who does wonderful artwork, and he's responsible for planting crosses at the sites in the desert, the American side, where remains have been found. And the first time we met him in 2019, he said, the desert is a beautiful place, and it's filled with beautiful plants that want to kill you because the journey is just so treacherous. And many of these people are traveling by night in the heat of the summer with no particular anything to light their way. So just imagine.
It's pretty scary, but traveling during the day probably would be really impossible. And we've been hearing more and more about high temperatures
Right.
there that are, well over 100, 110, 20
Right.
in the desert there.
I can't offer you statistics on this, but my understanding is that more people who are dying in the desert trying to get to their destinations are dying of dehydration and exposure to the elements, although many of them are dying due to violence perpetrated against them. That's a whole other story. But yeah, the trip is horrible, and many of these people are making the trip with babies, if you can imagine.
It's really hard to imagine.
Yes, it is. So if we could go to slide number 1, I will tell you something. Nope.
That isn't number 1.
No.
Uh-oh.
No.
Do we get...
Can we back up, or is that not possible?
I think they're not in a real sequence
Okay,
on the things,
all right.
but we'll try to get it.
Okay. Well, do you want me to go just in the order of what's presented here? I'm looking at
can
the
try
screen
that.
just to see.
Oh,
Thank you.
we've got
Success.
it. Yes.
Okay. So this is a general view of the border wall and what people arrive to. It is like a roller coaster of, ultimate magnitudes. So they've crossed, in this slide, the area to the right of the wall, which, by the way, is the ugliest thing I've ever laid eyes on, is the Mexican side. The area to the left is the American side. People have traveled through the desert under whatever circumstances they may, and they arrive to an inhospitable, dry, out in the middle of nowhere space. And this is where they're taking their seats and hoping to start the process for a better life. When I used to hear about the desert and desert crossings, I always pictured flat, sand, a cactus here and there. The desert in many areas is mountainous and really foreboding.
And the lack of water is just a huge issue.
Right. The lack of water and the lack of technology for communication. And I just imagine what it's like to arrive at that place totally separated from your family and your home and everything that you know, not having any idea what you're facing ahead.
Now, the wall looks huge. How tall is it?
I think it's about 30 feet high.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in some states, in some areas of states, because I was only in Arizona between Nogales and Sasabe, there's actually barbed wire on the top of the wall, so.
It seems like, looking back at history, there have been some times when walls have fallen and some when they're getting built. And
Right.
I don't get the motivation to build the walls. But we're seeing it in
Right.
more parts of the world than just that one border.
I think walls are built out of fear and out of othering and out of selfishness, out of nationalism. The list is like this long about why walls are going up.
But everyone celebrates when they come down. I remember when the Berlin Wall came down, and people were thrilled. I lived in Israel from 1969 to 74, and when I arrived, some of my friends had been there before 1967, and they showed us where Jerusalem had been a divided city like East Berlin.
Right.
And they said, oh, and it was great. There were no walls. And of course, some places where there were no walls, there are new walls.
Right. And I equate those walls with the wall at our southern border. But that's a whole other topic.
We only have 55 minutes.
Right, we'll do this again sometime. Can we go to the second slide? Okay. To me, this is the definitive explanation for why I go, what is happening, and what I think we should expect for very long into the future. Now, in this particular one, the faces are not blurred out. When I post to social media, something like this would have the faces blurred because there's still a factor of danger, not necessarily for these people, but for their families back home. Okay. Who may be held, hostage to pay us money, or we know where your relatives are and we will come for them. Or to say to these people, pay us money or we're going to get your families at home. It's a horrible, vicious cycle of violence. So what strikes me about this picture is not just the number of people who are sitting facing us on the American side, and please note the number of children. But you can see in the back the people still on the American side, and they are waiting to go to a gap in the wall just several yards down to come and join these people. And this to me says, this is what's happening and this is what will continue for a very long time. And we need to deal with it humanely. Humanely.
Well, we can talk later about ways that we could deal with it, but it doesn't seem as though through quite a few different administrations that we've really solved it.
Right. I think that we have the way, we don't have the will. And
Yeah.
I really don't mean we. I mean,
Yeah. The people who are empowered to
Exactly.
do something in a systemic way rather than being a Samaritan who's doing maybe, I don't know, mitigating damage a little bit.
right. I should mention, because we've used the word Samaritan a number of times, excuse me, the two groups of Samaritans that I worked with are the Tucson Samaritans and the Green Valley Samaritans. I know that your former guests were working with the Ajo Samaritans, so that there are various groups. They are church-based, but working with them does not require any church affiliation, any religious affiliation, but they're angels. And they've been doing this for 20 years, pretty much 24/7. So.
You know, really, God bless them for being able to
Right.
do that and persist.
Right. It's an aging group. You know, young people have families and they have full-time jobs and blah, blah, blah. One of the concerns now is enlisting the help of younger people who can carry this on. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and that's true on a lot of fronts now. Young people are struggling
Right.
in ways that our generation didn't.
Right.
And even like when I had young kids and worked at a low-paying job, I couldn't do politics or activism. I was very home-based.
Yep. Same here, minus the kids, but
Yeah.
the same sort of thing. If we can go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is an example of what happens when the Samaritans go out with their trucks that are loaded with pretty much donated supplies. So this is just one truck that I happen to be riding with. And again, it's loaded with water and all sorts of just basic survival things. It's not always the case that somebody in the Samaritan truck speaks Spanish. It's very helpful, and on this particular day, Pastor Mayer from Green Valley, who does speak Spanish, was talking to these folks while we were unloading the truck. And this is a very small group compared to many of the others that we've encountered.
Now I see there's an opening in the wall there.
Yes,
So what goes through it?
people.
No, I was wondering if there was any official back and forth coordination.
No, there are certain places across along the wall, and I will show you one in a slide coming up, that are open to allow access to deal with things like erosion control and other things for which equipment has to go back and forth. I don't have an explanation for why all of the gaps are there. Some of them, there's just a crossing of barbed wire. Some are of all sorts. This one happened to be one that was crossed by barbed wire. And there is nothing, well, there are a few things more fulfilling than lending a hand through barbed wire to someone who has finally arrived in a traumatized, physically depleted state. So,
Yeah.
yeah. If we can go to the next slide, you'll see a picture. This is another gap. So they don't all have barbed wire across them. Sometimes there's just, a metal bar or a wooden barricade. This dear lady's name is Gail. She works with the Tucson Samaritans. And one of the things that folks do when they come to gaps in the wall is to actually go up to the barrier and kind of yell into the Mexican side, "Somos Samaritanos," we are Samaritans, "Tenemos agua," we have food, we have water, in the hope of drawing people out. And sometimes that has a positive result, but it's really not too hard to imagine the fear of people who are in hiding on the other side, who may not know who to trust, who may not know that those wonderful red shirts, should have worn it today, those wonderful red shirts with the Samaritan logo on it, they might not know what it means. So it's an ongoing struggle.
And that probably is ongoing. Like even the ones who come here and get to stay, you don't really ever know who to trust until you're, closer.
That's right.
More in the community.
Right. Particularly, I think when people come and they are in the process of asking for asylum, and they're in the court system, and they know it's not going to happen in 6 months, and it won't happen in a year. They could be in this limbo for quite a long time. What does one do with one's life in those circumstances?
Yeah, and probably not everyone in the system wants to help speed them through.
yeah, let's look at the court. Let's look
Yeah.
at asylum court in Hartford, 450 Main Street, Hartford, Connecticut. There's lots of feelings on both sides in that building. So,
Yeah.
the next slide will give you another glimpse of a gap in the wall, but it's got a totally different explanation. Okay, here we go. So the posts in this particular part of the wall had been purposely cut by a border wall crew. And I don't know, can you make out the rocks that are on the far side, on the
Yeah.
Mexican side? All of that is for erosion control. So this gap was purposely cut so there could be soil erosion work done, and then they will be repaired and replaced. Not all of the columns that are cut by construction crews, because people are doing what absolutely is ever necessary to reach safety. The question that I wanted to ask these construction workers, and I didn't out of respect for the Samaritans with whom I was riding, and just, you don't want to do this, you want to be part of just continuing to do the good work.
Yeah.
What I wanted to ask them was, are the arms that you are using to reconstruct this part of the wall, are those arms the same arms that you use when you go home at night to hug your children goodnight, while you've just come from helping to maintain a wall that says, we don't want your children here? I can't put it together. I can't put it together.
I don't know. Our thinking, I think, has become very siloed. A lot of people, as it's beyond just this job, a lot of people in the U.S., we have a very military-based economy.
Mm-hmm.
And in New London, you know, the big employer is Electric Boat. And like, we always were dirt poor, partly because neither Bob nor I would ever work for a military company. You know, he was a draft evader, and it wasn't just to stay out. It was because he didn't want to participate.
It was making a statement.
Yeah. So it would have been really hypocritical to work from a distance in the same industry, only safe. But it is a real problem for me to deal with the fact that, you know, I live in a city that economically is very dependent on, you know, the military economy.
Right. And in many conversations that I've had with the people who do this work all the time, in an effort to calm down my own rage, if you will, what I hear from a lot of people who deal with this every day is that these are people who have families to support. They need to feed their children. This is a job. And it's hard to argue with that, but my very innermost, deepest heart wants to say, how do you reconcile it? That's all. I just want to know how people do that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it would be really difficult to.
Right.
But maybe for some people, it's easier than seeing your family, you know, go hungry.
Right, and that explanation does humanize the workers who do this work, and I need to be mindful of that. It just doesn't come easily.
Well,
And
I
maybe
don't
that's
know.
a failing on my part, I don't know, but there it is.
I think maybe one of the long-range ways to deal with it is to, like, create solidarity among the workers in all different fields, so that, you know, they're just not in these little silos.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we could have, you know, a general strike of all these people who are doing jobs that are not really working towards a good end. But I hear you. You probably saw the movie Shoah.
Yes.
And the part that I always come back to is the man who was scheduling the trains for deporting the Jews. and he was talking about, in the most mundane way, about his job, and you could tell he was never encouraged at all to look at the big picture. He just had his little piece, and one of the things he brought up was, well, you know, sometimes they traveled first class, sometimes in cattle cars, but I always tried to schedule at least 200 so we could get group rates. And it's like that, I saw the movie in the 80s, but that really stood out for me. And it's not as extreme, but I think some people who are doing these other jobs, like, they are so discouraged from looking at like how they're contributing to a big bad picture.
Right. Well, I think the most positive thing that I have taken away from my conversations with the Samaritans at the border is that steeping ourselves in rage against the people who were doing this kind of work robs us of the energy of just doing the good work. So let's just concentrate on why we're here and our dedication to it. And it makes sense to me. Sure. I'm really trying.
We all have finite energy.
That's
Where are we going to put it?
Right, exactly. So I think it's sage advice. Can we go to the next slide? All right. So another friend, Jane Story, who works out of Green Valley, had painted this rock white and used black letters to say, "Bienvenidos," welcome. And she put it at the wall, I believe, facing into Mexico. And she went back several days later because she wanted to know if it was still there. Well, it was still there, but somebody had vandalized it with "not welcome, not welcome," but even worse, if you can go to the next slide, please. They also wrote, "Turn around, you will be shot." This isn't just heartbreaking. This is, I don't know what, this is mind-blowing. That's the kind of hate that lives alongside the goodness at the border.
And I asked you about your motivation, but the person who wrote that, I wonder about their motivation as well.
And I'm sure that they feel just as strongly about their right thinking as I know mine to be. Can we go on to the next slide? I will try to quickly tell you the story about Sasabe. This is the port of entry in Sasabe, which is a town that's been divided by the wall. So there's Sasabe, Mexico, Sasabe, Arizona. This is the official point of entry to which people from Sasabe presented themselves. And this happened just shortly before I went this past November. They have been controlled by a fairly non-threatening cartel for a long time, and for whatever reason, that cartel was challenged by another. And that challenge in the town of Sasabe, which is already poor, which is already lacking, you know, any substantial food store or a hospital or whatever, that clash resulted in the burning of houses and the killing of people. Many people were fleeing to wherever they thought they could find safety, and some of them came to this port of entry and said, "Our homes are being burned and we are being murdered. Please allow us to come to safety on the American side." And the border guards, in their infinite wisdom and humanity, said, "Nope, you have to go home." I'm sorry I don't know Eduardo's last name, but Eduardo was a young man who presented himself at this port of entry. He had been the victim of a gunshot. He was turned away, and he died of his wounds on the Mexican side. So the next several slides are very specific about what happened because of that decision. People were cutting holes in the wall to get to the American side. And this was the first group that I met when I was working with the Samaritans. And it's hard to see, it may be hard to see from this slide, but there's a young woman holding a 3-month-old baby in the back of this photo. And the next slide, please. There's Gail calling Border Patrol. The woman to the far left is Dora Rodriguez, who came here as a teenager in 1979, who she was told she was an hour or two from death when Border Patrol picked her up. 13 of the 26 people in her group died in the desert, and she has spent her life dedicated to social work and working for people who are really in need. I consider her my mentor. So Gail is calling Border Patrol to say, we have people here in Sasabe who are waiting to be picked up to start the process. Next slide. Okay. So some of the people who were coming were anticipating or had relatives who were coming to pick them up to whisk them away to safety in their homes in Tucson or Phoenix or whatever. Here is Dora explaining to some people that if you do that and you're caught, you're immediately deported. If you come and you present yourself to Border Patrol to stake a claim for asylum, you have a chance of staying. And so she is telling these people, come to the center of town with us, which was, a matter of a few blocks. We have supplies for you, we have water, we have food, and we will call Border Patrol. So she was showing them the way to at least temporary safety. And you can tell from the trail behind the people on the right, the trail from the wall down to the main road, which is really a dirt road in Sasabe, is long and twisty and filled with all of those plants that want to kill you. And many of the people who were coming down these trails are old, infirm, and in desperate need of physical support.
And clearly don't know the bureaucracy that's involved in
Right.
actually being able to come
Right.
here and stay here.
Right, right. Many people don't know what they're facing. Next slide. So I hesitate to use slides. I hate to use pictures in which I appear, but I do it for a particular reason. These two men were coming down the trail, and I was helping the man in front who was being assisted by the man in back, and the man in back himself was not doing very well. The reason that I share pictures like this is simply to say, if I can do it, other people can do it. It's not some faraway story. That's the human connection, and I believe that we're all capable of making that connection, which is 50% of why I go. Okay. Next one. All right, so that's the Border Patrol van that came to Sasabe, Arizona to pick people up. I believe they can hold up to 15 people. If they have come carrying lots of supplies from home, if they're carrying anything more than a backpack, they are often told that they need to leave them because there's no room in the van. So you arrive and you come with your most precious possessions. You may not see them again. Next one, please. So there are a lot of questions about, well, what happens to people after they're picked up by Border Patrol? This is the very first stop in this particular location. And I don't remember the name of the facility. I should have studied harder last night. But this is where the very, very first steps of intake happen. The gathering of very, very basic information. What's your name? Where are you from? Fingerprinting may be done here, I'm not sure. But from this facility, people are then transferred to Tucson, where the real process begins. But I am struck by the fact that all of these facilities are totally masked. You cannot see into them. And my personal feeling is that when the government is running facilities into which we have no view, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
It's really frightening. So, okay, the next slide. When I came back in May, the situation with the numbers of people who were coming through and sitting down had really risen. And the Samaritans realized that there was a need for areas that they could come to where they could rest in shade, where there might be rudimentary cooking facilities, where more people could be attended to. And this one was built, I think it's about 7 miles down from the end of the wall. It was staffed by Samaritans. The intention was for somebody to be there at all times for when people came down. Sometimes that was difficult, but this also meant that Border Patrol could get a call and say, there are 50 people at the camp, and they could come and they could get several people at the same time.
Now the question, when
Yes.
people get registered with Border Patrol, where do they stay while everything is being processed? It's a pretty drawn-out process.
Yeah, and I don't have a definitive answer. I know that for many people, when they go to Tucson, many of them are cleared to come further into the country to stay with family or friends who can sponsor them. There are detention centers, right, that are not very welcoming. I think there are many situations for which there are many explanations and
Okay.
plans.
Yeah, so there's no set thing that people can necessarily
No.
expect.
No. The lucky ones are cleared to come further into the country to stay with family.
Yeah,
very
there's no
hard.
guarantee of that.
Right. The next slide. So this is actually a Border Patrol van coming to the camp to pick up people. And the folks are usually told, okay, line up, women on one side and men on the other. And in this particular case, one of the Samaritans actually told the Border Patrol guards that someone in the men's line was the brother of one of the women in the women's line, and that they would really like to stay together, and could they please be transported together? And the answer was yes. And I take heart by those tiny little bits of humanity and positive actions. It doesn't happen all the time, but this is just a general scene. This is what it looks like.
I'm guessing the people who work for Border Patrol also, it is kind of a job. They don't necessarily choose that career because it's their calling to, deal with immigrants.
Yes. It's amazing how
Yeah.
many of the Border Patrol agents are Spanish speaking. Okay. Perhaps some of them go into this thinking that they are going to help with the situation. I highly recommend Jen Budd's book. That's JENNBUDD. She is a former Border Patrol agent who wrote a book, Against the Wall, in full double meaning of against the wall. And you will get a very, very clear, open, difficult to read synthesis of what Border Patrol culture in general is all like, is
Yeah.
all about.
I must admit, I can't even imagine it.
No, I mean, we could talk about police in general. That's another visit,
Yeah.
but I think it's the same, in most cases, it's the same mentality. I basically view most Border Patrol agents as bounty hunters. And it's not a noble profession, but
Well,
that's
and
me.
it's too bad we actually have that profession that's defined in that way. Once there was a Statue of Liberty. Well, the Statue of Liberty still stands.
Right.
I just don't know what it stands for.
Right. So, but I definitely recommend Jen's book. And she's also on Facebook. Follow her if you want real first-hand information and analysis.
Okay, Jen Budd.
Jen Budd, 2 N's, 2 D's in her name. Next slide, please. After that first camp was established for a time, it was recognized by the Samaritans that they really needed a second camp right at the end of the wall where construction had stopped as a resting place for people who were coming around at that point. And this was a much smaller, I say camp, it's really a welcoming center. People are not here overnight unless they've arrived very late at night and Border Patrol isn't coming until the next morning. But again, it's stocked with food and water and Samaritans who are there just to say, you are worthy. There's a woman sitting down next to the Samaritan who is wearing the white t-shirt. I won't even use her first name, but she spoke as little English as I speak Spanish. But we made it work, and we spoke as much with our hands and our eyes as we did with words. She was here, headed for Minnesota to join her husband, who had been released from detention and was now working 2 or 3 jobs to make enough money to support his family. There were people in this group headed for West Virginia, for Oregon, for California, for New York. I mean, these people were really headed for the United States. A very diverse group, very diverse group. And it was humbling to sit with them. You know, I have problems? No, I don't have problems. I don't have problems. Next slide. So this is Gail, and I'm sorry, I do not remember the name of the person that we were riding with this day, at least not from this photo. This is a water tank. Very often put out into the desert by a group called No More Deaths, another group called Humane Borders, and these blue water tanks will hold gallons and gallons and gallons of water for migrants who are traveling on particular trails. And there's a blue flag that's attached to it, flying very high, and that's the visual signature to people who are traveling. Come here and there's water waiting for you. These tanks have been known to be vandalized by Border Patrol and by vigilantes. You can find some of them that have bullet holes in them. You can find some of them where the spigots have been rendered useless. But these good people go out day after day to make sure that they're full. These are really life-saving.
Yeah, and you were there in May, but now we're, in July, and it's only hotter.
Right, right. Okay, next slide, please. We're actually coming down to the last 5 or 6. So one of the things that I did in 2019 was to accompany the Samaritans when they went out into the desert to do water drops. My experience with them that year was along very flat, almost even ground trails. This time around, I had a very different experience. And you can't really tell from this photo, but the steep grade of this trail was remarkable, and it was hot, and we were carrying gallon jugs of water in backpacks, and some of these fine folks were carrying them by, in their hands. And all I could think of was, all right, I'm traveling up this path. I had a good breakfast this morning. I had my coffee and I drank lots of water, and I'm going home in a couple of hours. What must it be like for people who have been traveling for days with no water, with shoes that are falling apart, with inadequate clothing and protection from the sun? This was humbling. This was very humbling.
Sometimes we get reminded of how much privilege we really do have.
Yeah, yeah. And even for those of us who get it, we could always use more reminders. Always. Okay, the next slide is related to this. This is one of the sites, one of the destinations that we were headed to when we were doing this water drop. And all of the water jugs that were there under the tree were left previously either by some of the folks that I was walking with or by other groups. And yeah, there are often personal belongings that are left behind. So when folks come at us and say, the migrants are trashing up the desert, you know, the most reasonable response from my perspective is, how physically able are they to pack up? How much energy do they have to neaten up a site when they're basically running for their lives? You know, we can clean this up. We can get to these sites and pitch in. And the Samaritans do. Next slide, please. All right, so we all read about the checkpoints that people have to drive through. And most of the people who have to drive through these checkpoints are people who, you know, go round trip every day on their way to work or on their way to go shopping, people who are just living their lives. The stopping of cars is arbitrarily decided by the Border Patrol agents who work it. So, you know, I'm an old white lady. I would not get stopped.
Yeah, and it's analogous, actually. You know, I was remembering a few years ago, I was driving home from the airport and going like 85 miles an hour on I-95 at 2 in the morning, and I was stopped by a trooper, but I didn't even get a written warning because I'm an old white lady. And he ended up, the officer ended up saying, "Oh, I just wanted to make sure you were okay."
Right. Now, I get that there needs to be surveillance for drug trafficking, for human trafficking. But who gets stopped and who doesn't get stopped is the issue at checkpoints like this.
And when you were talking about it, you know, you mentioned the walls, both the tangible walls and the intangible walls. But wherever you have walls, you have checkpoints.
Right. And you will find the checkpoints. Checkpoints are can be used within 100 miles of any border. So that's a lot of checkpoints.
That is. It's like the width of Connecticut.
Yeah. They're out there, they're functioning, doing business as usual. The next slide. We've only got 2 to go here. So, and that reminds me, there's something else I want to tell you about, but this sign was posted near one of the camps that the Samaritans erected, saying that transportation of undocumented non-citizens is a federal crime. So, in some instances, migrants have been transported from either one of the camps or at points along the wall where they have been sitting for purposes of getting them to a safer place along the wall. It might be sometimes because there are 3 people sitting alone and they really need the benefit of community, or in most cases because people need medical attention and we need to get them closer and closer to Border Patrol and medical facilities. And that transportation is provided by car. Sometimes these transports have been questioned by Border Patrol, and the explanation is we are not transporting anybody further into the country. We are transporting them for basic aid. I don't know of any arrests that have been made along those lines. I was riding in one car, and we came upon a group of people, and there was a woman with a very badly injured ankle. And expect her to walk this roller coaster of a hot, dry, rocky road was simply out of the question, and we wanted to get her closer to aid. And the driver of the car looked at the rest of us and said, "Does anybody object?" Because if anybody had objected, we would not have transported this woman. She said, "Does anybody object?" And our answer was, "Hell no.
Yeah.
Get her in the car. We're going." So, you know, these signs are intimidating until you think it through. And the question that I would ask everybody is, what will you do when you come into that situation?
Although it's a sad commentary that it's a crime.
Yes. Yeah. It is. The last slide that I have for you before I want to tell you something about the broader picture. This is a picture all on the American side, and it's not clearly seen, but that is a rope that's been thrown over the wall. And the clearest assumption is that this was used for somebody to climb over and then drop down. These are the measures to which people are going.
And you said they're 30-foot walls, so
They're
it's like
30 feet high.
It's like climbing down from a three-story building.
Yes, yes. These are well, this is an example of the lengths to which people will go. You know, there are those many people who say, well, we don't mind them coming, but they should come legally, meaning through a port of entry. Coming through a port of entry.
It's not what it was a century ago.
You can be in line waiting to come through a port of entry for months. There was a new app that was put in effect during the Biden administration that people were expected to use out in the desert where they may not have service, and you needed to download things and put in all kinds of information, and then I believe 8 o'clock in the morning was the appointed time. You needed to hit that enter button, and then it was a lottery of which 40 people will we accept. And we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of people coming. And in most cases, the app did not recognize black and brown faces very clearly.
A bugger feature.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to use it. If you don't mind, a bug or
Be
a
my
feature.
guest.
Right. So
we have 5 minutes. So I was supposed to remind you.
Wow. Yes.
That you want to.
I just want to tell you about all of the players who are out there in the desert. Okay, we have migrants, most of whom now are coming to claim asylum and actually presenting themselves at the wall. We have some who are still coming who are willing to risk a desert crossing to get to family, or who are coming to look for work. We have Border Patrol. We have vigilantes. We have coyotes who are bringing both of those groups of migrants to come over. And they're not particularly kind, loving, giving people. We have the Samaritans, thank goodness. We have humane borders. We have no more deaths. We have many, many people working out there. But I think it's vital to understand that it's not just migrants and Samaritans and Border Patrol. It's so many more groups of people who are coming at this situation from different points of view and with different intentions.
So since we only have 3 minutes,
Yes.
So people who are watching this, who are in Connecticut, who are probably unlikely to go in person, some might, but most won't, what can they do to help be supportive of these efforts?
They can make financial contributions to the Tucson Samaritans, to the Green Valley Swarita Samaritans, both of whom are on Facebook, and you can Google them on the general web. You know, most of the work they do is fueled by donations. We need to support them. And the other thing to support the work is to become better educated. I should have brought, and again, I apologize, I should have brought my reading list. Perhaps I can send it to you before
Yeah, and
this is aired. There's so much vital information written from firsthand perspectives about why people are coming and what they face when they're coming. I think to open our hearts is a really big way to be supportive.
And that would help actually more than just the immigrants coming, because, you know, as we discussed a little bit before the show, people who are unhoused, who have lived here all their lives, are also being criminalized.
Right. If we can get people to access information that will open their hearts, then perhaps we will have a bigger army of people who are willing to challenge the systems that make all of this work necessary.
And maybe tear down some of those walls.
Oh, please, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Deborah, for coming down here.
Thank you.
And, you know, we do post these on YouTube as well as airing them here.
Yes.
So we can add the reading list, you know, to that
I'll
as well.
send it to you as soon as I get home this morning.
That sounds great.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you for the chance. You may be sorry that you said that. There is so much to talk about.
There is. This show has been going for 20 years. So, yeah, we started in October 2004. So, but no one was. So thanks very much.